Welcome to the I Create Daily podcast. I'm Leora Alderson.
And I'm Devani Alderson. We are your co-hosts on this journey of creativity and productivity.
I Create Daily is for artists in every genre of creating, from musicians to writers, crafters to inventors, bloggers to entrepreneurs. I Create Daily is a movement for creators serious about your art.
If you're into creating anything, this podcast is definitely for you. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey.
Hello and welcome to the I Create Daily podcast, a movement for creators serious about their work. I'm Leora.
And I'm Devani. And our guest today is an award-winning American author, Padma Venkatraman, who has worked as chief scientist on oceanographic ships, spent time under the sea, directed a school, and lived in 5 countries. Padma has 4 published novels, 3 of which have won several national and international awards. They are A Time to Dance, Island's End, Climbing the Stairs, and her latest book, The Bridge Home, was just published in February 2019. Padma gives keynote addresses, speaks on TV and radio, serves on panels, conducts workshops, has been chief guest at international author festivals, and visits schools all over the world. And we love the quote on her website, "Stories are ships on which we sail the oceans of imagination." So welcome, Padma.
Yes, that's wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So your books, tell us, how do you go from being a scientist and oceanographer to writing novels? How did that start?
Well, I think I always loved writing, and I was afraid, though, when I was young, that I may not be able to make a profession of it, that I wouldn't be able to earn enough to support myself, and it was very important for me that I would be financially independent as an adult. Mm-hmm. And so I could, although I never had any role models necessarily that were women of color, that were scientists that I saw, not even in books necessarily, I did know that was something that was open to me and that I could do. So, and I loved mathematics as much as I loved words and language. So that was what brought me to oceanography. I also had a very deep commitment to the environment always, and to saving our world. And so oceanography is obviously inextricably tied up with that.
So you've spent a lot of time under the ocean as well, scuba diving, snorkeling, and that sort of thing. I would imagine that's one of your loves. You enjoy doing it.
I didn't spend a whole lot of time under the ocean. I have done scuba diving and I have snorkeled, but that was, I wouldn't say a whole lot. Most of the work that I did actually was off from the surface of ships. So,
okay. And what would that entail? What was some of the kind of work that you did?
So one of the things that we do, I was looking at pollution in the oceans. So one of the things that I would do then would be to deploy instruments that would measure pollution from the deck of a ship.
Interesting. Wow.
And assess that then.
Do the studies and reading. Yeah. So when did so you've always been interested in writing, you didn't think you could really make a living with it, so then you went the science track and you got that career. So then when did you return to the idea of writing?
I wouldn't say I returned to it. It was always there as part of my life. But when I was in graduate school, actually studying to be an oceanographer, I started to write again creatively as a way to keep in touch both with India, because I had left India when I was 19. So I would then write articles about science for lay people. And that was a way to keep in touch with India and a way to keep in touch with this more creative way of writing. And so I did both. And then I started to write for young people about science initially in journals and so on. And then when I was becoming an American citizen, going through that process, very few people who are, or people who have been born in this country don't usually realize what the process entails. And it can be quite grueling. And one of the things that one has to swear to do for this country is to bear arms if the country decides to ask you to do that. And that was something that, many people just swear to without any problem. assuming that they're never going to be called upon to do it.
Right.
And on the one hand, as a woman, I probably will not be asked to serve in that way, but still I didn't want to say those words unless I felt they were true. So I really started to ask myself, this whole thing about nonviolence and violence, where do I stand on that issue? Do I think that a person ever, has the right to be violent? Do I think that a nation should ever take up arms for any reason? And as I started to think about that, I went back in my own mind to a different time and place, India in the 1940s, where my mother was growing up as a young woman. And at that time, we had a tremendous contrast in the world because we had Mahatma Gandhi and then we had Hitler as well, both alive at the same time. And then, you have this horrendous war, and you had the world's largest and first struggle for independence, which was peaceful, nonviolent. Maybe peaceful is not quite the right word because it wasn't peaceful necessarily. But I think that contrast made me really sort of wonder what she had thought at the time, and also a granduncle that I had who had volunteered to be part of the Allied forces at that time. And many people don't know this, but India had the world's largest all-volunteer Allied force. And the people who served just fell through the cracks because no one wanted to recognize them as heroes. And so I started to think about those unsung heroes, and I started to feel like I had never really known this man when I was young, but he became a character in my mind for me. And then I thought of him, and I thought of all these tales that my mother had told about how she'd been made to live in this very, very traditional household where she was forced to live downstairs where the kitchen was and was not even literally allowed to climb the stairs to get books out of the upstairs library.
Wow.
Because she was female, and the library was in the men's realm.
Wow.
So when I thought about all of that, it just came together in a way as a novel that, among other things, explored my own issues and my own questions about violence and nonviolence and where I stood on that.
Oh, wow. That's quite an elaborate story and inspiring at the same time. So you're referring to the story basically that became the premise for your book, Climbing the Stairs, right? And it's such a beautiful intro. So 15-year-old Vidya is the one that dreams of going to college, which was an unusual aspiration for a girl living in British-occupied India during World War II. Then tragedy strikes, and Vidya and her brother are forced to move into a traditional household with their extended family where women are meant to be married, not educated. Breaking the rules, Vidya finds refuge in her grandfather's library. I love that. So did your mother find a way to find an ally that helped her to access those forbidden books?
Absolutely. So she did, she is now a lawyer, and she is 86.
Wow.
A person who's 86 in this country who's been a lawyer is already somebody who has had to fight a great deal to get where they are, let alone, her growing up in India at that time, being 86 now and a lawyer. That's very unusual.
Yes. So when you came to this country when you were 19, how did you come? Did you come alone? Did you come with your family?
I came alone.
Wow.
Absolutely. And now I thought nothing of it at the time.
Brave.
Yeah, and now I really understand, I see second generation Indian children, or I see, South Asians who've been brought up here like Devani. And I think, sometimes they don't have an understanding of what it means to be an immigrant, to leave your home and country, especially at that time, Devani, because we did not even have cell phones. And we didn't have what we have now, which is this Zoom and this ability to be able to zoom into your living room, or Skype, none of those things. And so when I came here, I was completely alone in a new culture. I had no one around me that I could call for miles if, anything happened. And I would call my mother once, I think a month it was, because on a student salary, you don't have a lot of money, and she certainly didn't have a lot of money either. And you would call, and there would be this operator who would allow you to speak for 3 minutes, and it would be so tense. And then they would say, another 3 minutes, and you'd say no, because 6 minutes was,
right,
expensive.
right.
Yeah.
So no text, no nothing. So it was, quite a difficult experience.
So was writing part of the way you worked through the sort of, I guess, loneliness and isolation of being an immigrant? Is that part of just
Absolutely.
the sort of like creativity saving you from all of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think art for, several of the other speakers that you've had as well is a kind of refuge in itself, a kind of, way that you connect with something that's beyond us, maybe.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Writing helps us discover ourselves.
Right.
And discover what we're thinking about things.
Yeah.
And discover the hidden thoughts even in those thoughts, like the hidden feelings in those thoughts. So you were writing and processing. So you were working, so you went to university. I guess you were on a student scholarship or program?
Yes, I was in graduate school at 19, by the way. I wasn't, yeah.
Wow, so you had already went to college early.
Yes.
Wow, okay.
Wow.
Precocious. So you were definitely educated.
Right, and 19 almost, I might have been, 20, and now that I think about it, but, I left India when I was 19, and I lived abroad for a little while. And then I went to graduate school. So when I actually finally went to graduate school, I was probably around 20, but anyway, 19, 20-ish. Yeah. Okay,
wow. So, and what year was that you came to this country then?
That's what I'm trying to think of. I think it was about, must have been 89, 90, something like that, 1991.
Okay, all right. So that sounds right. And so when did you publish your first book? And tell us that journey.
So I had been getting, as I said, I was just writing these things, and everybody would, or if once in a while somebody said they would be published. Actually, I have to say, with the articles that I wrote, I never got rejections. Everybody was delighted to have somebody who was a scientist who was willing to write for lay people. And it was fun. I wrote about whatever I felt like, and it felt like pocket change that would come in to augment my lousy salary as a graduate student. And I didn't really think about that, about writing a book until much later. So I was at Johns Hopkins University. I did my postdoctoral research there. And then, I had decided, and then I worked, toward becoming a professor at a university. And I really started to think at that point, there were lots of changes in my life. And I wondered if I wanted to do that, or maybe I wanted to go another way. And I think that's when I decided that I would step back from my potential, career as a tenured professor in the sciences, which I didn't do that, and decided instead that I would cut back and, do a little bit of teaching, perhaps not any more research, and focus on writing as well, because some people do everything. But I felt like I wanted to be a mom, and I wanted to write, and I couldn't see being a professor the way I wanted to be a professor, to be a teacher the way a good teacher gives so much to their students. A good researcher is constantly thinking about research, and I didn't think I could do all three.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah. So you left so you left about, when was that you decided to start writing? You were a mom by now and married?
No, so I was married, but not yet a mom. So it was about, I want to say 12 years ago, 12, 13, 14 years ago, maybe even 15 now. But that I started writing the novel and started working, slowly moving away from science, because I remembered still that, it's not easy to make a living as a writer. So I started to slowly move away from that. And then as I went on, moved further and further away. My first novel, Climbing the Stairs, was published about 11 years ago now. And my daughter was born 10 years ago. Actually, I take that back. So she was born 11 years ago. The book must have been published. Wait, I'll tell you exactly when it was published. About 10 years ago. Over 10 years ago. So, 2008.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, you're right. Over 10. Yeah, it's just beautiful. And we'll definitely link to the covers. So 11 years ago, you published your first book. And how did that come about? So tell us the journey that you went through with your publisher. And self-publishing even wasn't that, I don't even think it was a thing yet, hardly at that point. So
like blogging was just emerging as a major player, and self-publishing definitely wasn't a huge thing.
Yeah, so did you submit to a number of publishers and get any rejections before you got accepted?
I submitted to several agents because I thought, I had this resume, I had written other things that had been published. And I thought I had a fantastic topic, hardly anyone has ever written about, or had at that point written about India and the Second World War. And I got about 40 rejections from agents. And these were the days that we would query by writing actual letters.
Right.
You would mail a letter out, and I didn't want to query like 50 people all at once. So it was this gradual, slow 40 rejections that built up over years. And I never changed the novel. They just said flat out, no, I don't want to see it. So this was a query to say, here's what the novel's about. Would you be interested? Mm-hmm. And essentially I told them what I told you, which of course I wrote the novel. So I think it's phenomenally interesting, but no. About
how did you keep resolve through that? Because not a lot of people want that much rejection, and maybe even just one rejection is soul crushing. So what did you tell yourself through all of that?
That's a fantastic question. And I think, to be a creative person at some level, it's very, very hard. And there are always different kinds of rejections. So it's not as though now, because I'm a published author, I don't get, let's say, negative feedback or negative things happen. There are always disappointments. And it's very hard. I think you just have to sort of protect that creative energy somehow, and you protect it by continuing to write. To me, yoga and meditation are also very, very important. And there are many people here who don't do quite as much yoga as I do and decide that they want to be yoga teachers. I learned from Yogacharya Krishnamacharya, who is one of the most, not one of, to me, he is the most brilliant yoga teacher that has existed in our lifetimes. And he taught me ever since the age of 8 until he died when he was about, I think he was 100 or 101 when he actually passed away. And hale and hearty and healthy until that very last moment. And so he was a big influence in my life, and he was somebody who taught me to, as I said, yoga and meditation, and that's something that I've carried all my life as well. Mm. That certainly helps you to, keep focus and say, don't allow, we speak in India about karma yoga, which is that you do the best you can do when you do something, but you try really hard not to be attached to the material reward, to the material failure or loss. And it's easy to say, it's very, very hard to do.
Right.
But I think, somehow I managed to do, to keep going. And then finally, the agent that took it sold it to Penguin, which I am quite sure at that time was the largest publishing house, if it still isn't. Probably still.
So that was about, you had been working to get your book, your manuscript accepted and then eventually by Penguin for what, a year, 2 years? How long?
Probably 2 years, or at least 2 years.
Okay. So then it must have been extraordinarily elating to have an agent who was going to take it and then who accepted it and then took it to Penguin and immediately it was accepted. So had you applied to Penguin on your own?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so you had gone only through the agents and they had turned you down. So I can only imagine the celebration in your household and in your heart when you got that letter and that notification.
It was lovely. And actually, I think it was spring, and my neighbor was mowing the grass, and he heard me scream. And he stopped because he thought something had happened, and he turned, and I thought I have to be, I was on the phone with my agent. I was so excited. And then, of course, I hung up and I ran over and I said, Stan, my book. And of course, I had told anybody that I was writing to, because it was sort of, felt like a secret. I didn't want to keep telling him, well, I have a book, and then people keep saying, oh, so when is it coming out? And I had to keep saying, oh, I don't know if it's ever coming out.
Right.
Yeah,
that's a good point. It is hard to have those, the well-meaning friends that are asking, but it's such a process. It's such a long process.
Yeah.
So then it was published, and now you have your book, and then it's a matter of, does it sell? Did it get distribution to bookstores and all of that, right?
Yeah. I mean, with Penguin,
it gets distribution, yeah. But, so the beautiful thing about it, like we're looking at the cover now on Amazon, and it's such a beautiful cover and so vibrant. And now when you have an array of books, it really adds to your author page and profile this artistic rendition of your creations. And even though it was published 11 years ago, it's just as good today because it's a fiction, it's a story, right? So you're still selling it today, and then the sale of that helps with the sale of the next one and the next one, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Islands End, my second book, though, it did very, very well with the critics. It got, starred reviews, which are very rare and very difficult to get. It got several of those, 4 of those, which is quite outstanding. But it's now out of print. So when I was speaking about sometimes it's not just all the way, it's not a straight climb necessarily ever. And so I do want to say there are always setbacks. And it's not as though, so that book didn't do well for several reasons with sales, even though it did brilliantly in terms of critical reviews and awards as well. It won the South Asia Book Award, and it won another international award. So in that way, it was fine. So all I'm saying is it doesn't mean that if you have a setback, even after you start publishing, that you have to give up. And I think, again, you will always have things. It's sort of an undulating river, but
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like what you said before of like there's different versions of rejection, and it can come in different styles, whether it's just the initial getting published or the how it's received. Did you have any pressure in writing your future books based on your first success with getting the first book published, or did you just have so many rejections from the first 40 people who told you no that you were just thrilled on the journey? Like, how did that play out emotionally for you?
I think for a long time I was very thrilled on the journey, and it was wonderful. It was difficult though when my second book, baby, Islands End. It's about my time as an oceanographer. It's about this tribe that I didn't do research on them. Obviously, I'm not an anthropologist. I don't study people or societies or any of that. I was there as an environmental scientist on the island. But what attracted me to this story was the people of the islands, the indigenous people on the Andaman Islands, where I was when I was a scientist. They have women as leaders of their tribes, which is something phenomenal, and amazing to me. And so it's about a young woman who's chosen to be the leader of the tribe and what she goes through to do that. And so in some ways it draws on my own story of being a leader often in places where I was the only person of color, I was the only female, and yet I was the chief scientist or whatever else. And then I think it felt personal to me, that rejection, when it went out of print. It was very, very difficult to take. And again, I think it's hard, but I kept going because I just thought, yes, there is pressure. Yes, there is external pressure. And yes, sometimes it mounts and you feel like, oh my goodness, this is so depressing. This is so tough. What keeps me going, though, is that I have a larger sense that writing and creating help to really communicate with other people, to connect with other people in a compassionate way. And I think that's so important to me. And to me, it's my exercise, if you will, of compassion when I write as much as I can. Because if you don't understand your characters from the inside out, if you don't have empathy toward your characters, then you can't imagine, you can't demand that your readers will have empathy either.
That's a great point. Yeah, as a writer, you have to get into the head and emotions and hearts and dreams of your characters. So that's a really great point. I don't think I've ever heard that expressed relative to how writing can help one express and develop compassion. And we're of course speaking about Island's End, your second, which I guess was your second novel, and seeing that go out of print. But of course, today you can easily bring it back to print yourself as a self-published book. Is that something you've considered?
I've thought about it, and who knows, although luckily for me, recently my editor said, one day we're going to bring that out again. So, I would rather do it that way, because having a traditional publisher, I think there is so much they do for me. There's so much they look after, especially with being Penguin Random House, that I don't think I want to get into the self-publishing, because I think to do self-publishing, you have to be very motivated. You also have to be terribly organized and, keep all your accounts in order and all of that kind of thing. And that is not my forte. That is not my gift. And I think
it's such a good
all over the place. I mean, I do think it requires a lot of intelligence and the kind of intelligence that it requires I don't have.
Yeah, or don't care to develop. Because if you did, you obviously could as a scientist, you could choose to, but it's a whole different thing than writing. It really does. It takes a different kind of mind. You have to learn so many different details. And so it is a good point for going with a traditional publisher. But, actually what occurred to me as you were talking about the theme and the plot that inspired it, with the recent publishing of publishing is not the right word, the movie Wonder Woman, and then even Thor, there's a lot of female role model characters that are coming out, strong women characters that are coming out. So it seems like, and you might even, there may or may not be some adjusting of that, like editing, like you may want to go in now and see how you might write some of it differently. Perhaps you could actually even add to it. So it seemed like a good timing, actually, to bring that one back into print.
Yeah. Well, let's see what happens. I mean, for now, I think I'm so focused on my other work as well.
Okay. Well, what is your other work? Yeah. What is your other work?
A Time to Dance, which is my third novel. That to me was a practice, and that was the time when it came out was the time that the other one went out of print. And so A Time to Dance is very much for me a spiritual novel. It's the first novel about a protagonist who is female, and with the main plot being spiritual awakening as seen through the Hindu lens. So it's the first novel that actually looks at a young girl who is Hindu and her spiritual awakening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It is not, however, a religious book. It is a spiritual book. And I make a difference because it's not a sermon. It's not proselytization. It's just seeing through a particular lens to some degree, but it reflects, I think, something far more universal, which is that the young woman in A Time to Dance is a dancer. She loves dancing. And then she loses her leg in an accident, and it's based on somebody that I knew. Shobha Sharma, who was a brilliant dancer. She didn't have an accident. She had something else happen to her. Was told she wouldn't be able to dance again, and continues to dance. And is a dance teacher, which is fantastic. And she's brilliant, beautiful dancer. But I always wondered what it would be like to go through something like that. It happened when I was quite young. So I watched or I witnessed that this was happening in someone else's life. And even though I didn't know her very well, I knew that it was happening. And that made an impact on me. And so it came back in the form of this novel. And it's, the young woman in the novel, Veda, her attitude to dance changes. So in the beginning, it's all about sort of self-aggrandizement and I am in the center, which sometimes we can allow our creativity to become like that. And at other times, things change. I am very, very sorry, but I hear somebody knocking madly on my door, so I have to run out and check on that.
Yeah, we'll pause.
Well,
Okay.
Okay.
We were just talking about your book, A Time to Dance, and
Yeah, and so I'm looking at the cover, and it looks like it's Bharatanatyam, classical Indian dancer, right? And the beautiful costume, and I think it's just fascinating that. And we actually recently interviewed a singer, songwriter, music composer, who a lot of what she writes is from the stories in the history of her family, and so like that's part of what.
And she also had she was diagnosed with something that prevented her from doing her music for quite a while in the way that she wanted to.
So it opened her creative arena. But so I think it's really fascinating that you're basically processing your life through your stories and in a way, and understanding your life and the people in them, and obviously, like you said earlier, developing your own compassion. So that's a wonderful connection there.
Yeah. And Bharatanatyam is supposed to be, it was meant to be a way to communicate with something else. So it was supposed to be a way that you would get closer to God, if you will. And, it fell out of that. And so many things happened historically as well. And so my young protagonist begins in this place where it is all about her being the focus and the center of attraction, which sometimes art can be. You become so tied into, this is my book, right? And this is a piece of my ego. This is a piece of me out there in the world. As I just said with Island's End too, it felt like a personal rejection somehow. And it's very hard to dissociate, but my protagonist doesn't become a Buddha. She doesn't, become an enlightened being, but she does start to move toward understanding that art is something that is about connecting to something larger, and learns through that and is empowered by it to grow in a different way, to become a deeper human being.
Yeah, well, and I think that originally the roots of Bharatanatyam, classical Indian dance, obviously all the stories, all the moves, all of that were created with a spiritual angle, and perhaps even before that, connected to the Devadasi tradition, where they were temple dancers, and that they were performing the ceremonies and the pujas by virtue of being temple dancers, basically, in the Devadasi tradition. So it makes sense. And yet, of course, like anything else, it has become more commercialized, more like, a thing that you do. I mean, same thing. I grew up in Hawaii, and hula is a similar thing, where now it's a tourist thing, but originally it was a way of expressing the love of the land and spirituality. So
it's like a fun thing you do in PE. Whereas it's like, no, there's some spiritual tradition here. Some
origin story to it. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So then tell us about your other book. Let me see, get back to that. Oh, The Bridge. And again, The Bridge Home. The art is just wonderful.
Yeah. You have an amazing artist.
Yeah,
on your team.
Is that Penguin that did all the art, the covers for you?
Yes, I have an amazing editor. So, and they have an amazing art director, obviously, at Penguin, and a lot of amazing artists as well. So
yeah, I mean, just looking the cover of The Bridge Home, it just draws you in. And makes you want to know the story of those 4 children running across that bridge. So tell us a little bit about The Bridge Home.
All right, so The Bridge Home is inspired also by things that I grew up in Chennai in India for a long time, and there was this bridge. There's a bridge. It still is there, actually. It hasn't completely fallen into the river, but it was already abandoned, crumbling, very old when I was growing up. And you see people living in, terrible conditions in India, which some of the readers have responded in ways, that with utter surprise and shock, asking me if this does indeed happen all the time. Is this common? And I think, yes, much more than you know. And of course, as a child in India, you grow up seeing this all the time. And I've seen people, homeless children who are homeless in situations like that. And that certainly affected me very, very deeply. And, I was also in a very unusual situation in that I grew up in a family of a single mother. And in India at that time, that was pretty much unheard of.
Yeah.
And so that was something else that, I could see we faced economic hardship, but then again, she would do a lot of charity. So she would work in places where I met children who had much less than I did.
Mm.
And so I realized, I realized that I wanted to tell those stories someday. And I would, scribble away in a little notebook. And one of my friends knew that I was doing that, and she said, "Padma, would you write my story one day?" So here it is. I mean, in large measure, I listened to many stories. It's not just her story. This particular story has taken from many of the people that I met, other people that I interviewed later, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an amalgam in a way, but it reflects that experience of dire poverty, but also the dignity that these children maintained through it all. The dignity, the love of life, the love of laughter. And although it is about something that is so tragic and so difficult and so horrifying and terrible, there's also joy in the book.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very important to me, because I think when you see that, when you enter through a character and you see both their joys as well as their difficulties and their challenges, you respect that character.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't pity them. You don't look down upon them.
Yeah.
You just start to look up to them, if anything.
Very rooted in gratitude. And I'm sure your mom was recognizing that too in doing her charity work. And it's like, yes, we're in this situation, but look, we could have less. We could not have a home at all. And I think it seems like a lot of your books are rooted in a sense of gratitude and a sense of personal strength, which I'm sure you grew up witnessing and experiencing yourself, both through watching your mom be a single mom in a country where that's not really a thing during that time, but then also you yourself as an immigrant coming to this country and having to find lots of internal strength.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what are you working on now? Are you working on the next novel? Like, how does it work for you? As you're writing the last novel that just came out, are you already so you just finished
Bridge Home.
The Bridge Home. And as you're working on that, did you already have in mind the next, or even before you started it? Or do you let it rest for a while and then you think about what you might want to start next?
I have so many ideas that I think I'll never be able to finish them in one lifetime. So I really hope the Indian idea that you might come back, or the Hindu idea that you might come back in another life, I hope it's true, because I'd love to come back again and again and again and be a writer every time.
Wow.
So the long and the short of that is that I have a lot of ideas. Until now, I've taken a long time to write them, to develop them, and to have them on paper. Often after one project is finished, I have several different ones that I work on. And one of the projects that I'm doing right now is a novel that is loosely autobiographical, and it is a novel that is potentially for adults. And I'm doing that at a place called the Hansa Wissenschaftskolleg in Germany, actually. So I have a fellowship to be a writer in residence there this summer and work. And I think I still will write for young adults and younger audiences than that, so middle grade and so on as well, for sure.
So did you, for this fellowship, so you applied for it and got it. So how does one go about applying for writers' fellowships like that?
I think one of the things you have to do is to research every writer's fellowship. So, there are several, if you Google them, for instance, but they have specific requirements sometimes. So I think anytime you apply, whether it's applying to find an agent, or it's applying for a fellowship, or even just a writing residency, you have to see if that particular niche is for you, both to see whether you can fit into it and also to see whether they would be likely to accept you. So this particular fellowship that I'm speaking of, the HWK fellowship, this Hansa Wissenschaftskolleg Writer in Residence, is a fiction meets science program. So it's meant for people who have a serious interest both in writing and in the sciences. And so obviously with me, I'm an oceanographer, and I write. And so many of the previous fellows of this program have also been brilliant writers and brilliant scientists. So they have both going for them. And so I think if you were to apply with just an interest in doing both, but no experience of having done both to some degree, it might be harder. So, how are you going to prove to them that you really do understand the science? And so it might not be for you, or it might not be for you at all if you have no interest in the sciences, which is fine. So I think sometimes people sort of blindly apply to everything, and I don't think that's a very smart way to use your time. So I think look on the internet to see what there is, and then understand what the fellowship is about. Try to read, maybe people whose work they have funded before or they have supported in the past, so you understand if your work would be perhaps something that they would want to read. And, of course, when it comes time, if you have that familiarity, you can always say, let's say if it's to an agent, you can say, I see that you represent so-and-so, and I think you might like my work because I love her work too, for instance. And what do you love about her work? Be specific about that. Or if you're applying to a fellowship like this, you say, hey, I noticed that Padma Venkatraman was one of your previous fellows, and I know she's an oceanographer and a writer, and here I am, I don't know who I am, let's say Devani, and I am a mathematician, and I also have an interest in writing and blah, blah. Then you can apply. See what I mean? Yeah. And then it shows them as well that you've done your homework. You're not somebody who's just applying.
Yeah.
But
Have you done a fellowship writing program before?
No. I think this is my first writer in residence fellowship. I've had other things before. I've got scholarships to attend writing workshops, for instance, or other kinds of things. I've been writer in residence in like libraries and so on, but not this sort of an international fellowship.
No, that'll be fun. So let's move to your daily creative habits, basically. So we're going to ask you just a few questions that will help our audience discover what works for you and might give them ideas of what could work for them. So do you have a daily creative structure? And if so, what is it?
I would love to have a daily creative structure. I think right now we have such a traditional split. I'm a mom. I have lots of things that I do with my daughter and I want to do with my daughter. So it varies from day to day. For the most part now that she goes to school, I try very hard when she leaves the house to do a bit of writing before she comes back. And so those are sort of my precious hours. And I would say that if anybody else is in a similar situation, to protect those writing hours is immense.
Yes.
And, this year with the Bridge Home, I'm doing a lot of promotion. And, thankfully, I'm very glad to have opportunities to speak about my work and to go elsewhere. But that means if someone decides they want to meet me during the day, I say no, because I have to say no sometimes. And I think sometimes what happens is when you work from home, it's so easy to think, oh, well, I'll just hop out and meet somebody for lunch. Yeah. Or, yes, I can do that. I can have tea with them before somebody. And then you lose the time that you complete this work. And so I think the best I can say is, even if you don't have a regimen, the hours you will have regularly, protect them.
Yes.
And don't give them up. I mean, you have to, be your own boss as well. And so be rather strict about that and say no.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
yeah, we absolutely agree. What advice for other artists? So you've already actually given the other advice for other artists relative to protecting their time and scheduling their creative time. Do you have any tips, 1 to 3 things that you think will produce the best results for writers aspiring to get published? Like, in other words, actually there are several things. One is we met you through Lisa Tenner, who is a writing coach. So do you have now a writing coach, or you just know her separately?
I know her separately.
Okay. So you don't. You
have a writing coach. I mean, I think Lisa is wonderful, and she's a very dear friend of mine. And so I have never experienced her as a writing coach, but I'm sure she's brilliant.
Okay, good. So you haven't invested.
She's a kind, wonderful person.
So you haven't invested in a writing coach. So basically you do your own work and then you submit to your manuscript or outline first to Penguin in this case, to your agent, or how does that work for you?
Yes, now that I have an agent, if I finish something, then I would send it to him to get feedback. Before that, I would certainly send it to several people who are trusted readers for me, get their feedback, do the best I can do to polish what I have, and then send it to my editor. And, you know, once your editor takes over, then it's mostly you and your editor working together to bring this vision of a book out into the world. I mean, my editor, Nancy Paulson, is, you know, immensely well respected in the field, and she's a brilliant editor. She has, you know, phenomenal authors. And so I think once that happens, then you trust her to help guide your book and to work together toward the same goal, which both of you always have, which is that the book should be the best it can be.
Did you work with the same editor for all your books? I'm not as familiar with the traditional publishing model, so is it standard and typical that you work with like the same publisher for each book, or does that vary? The same editor.
Yeah.
Yes. So usually once you get an editor, you work with that editor for every book. I mean, obviously now if you have something which is completely different, so let's say you have an editor who some editors just love fiction, and maybe an editor doesn't love fiction, and you write a book that's nonfiction, then you might go to someone else. Or let's say there's somebody, a publishing house that or an editor who loves to work with children's and young adult books but doesn't like books for adults, then you would go to someone else again. So there are times that you might do that, and there are other authors that I know. One of my favorite authors, Margarita Engel, is a brilliant author for young adults and for middle grade, and she also writes picture books, and she has several different editors, and so she works with many different publishing houses. So some people do that, and I think another an author friend of mine, Stacy Lee, also has more than one editor that she works with, more than one publishing house. So that happens as well.
So when it
hasn't happened to me.
When it comes to agents, so you have your agent now representing you for anything else that you write, I presume. What advice can you give to writers who are looking for an agent?
Be very careful, because there are real agents like mine, but there are also a lot of people now posing as agents. It's very easy to do in this day and age to have a website which costs you nothing and you put up in a few minutes, or costs you very little, and you can pretend to be an agent, right? So one of the things that I would look for is, I think there's the AAAR, the American Association of Author Representatives. Most of the time, if an agent is paying to be a member of that association, that means they subscribe to a code of ethics that they can't break. There are other things as well you might want to look for. Make sure that the agent never charges you money. The agent should never ask you to pay for anything. They only make money off your sale. They make a percentage off your sale. So my agent, for instance, makes 15% off of everything that he sells for me. And that is how an ethical agent works. So an agent is not somebody who says, hey, give me some money and then let me see if I can sell this book for you, or flatters you. My agent is brilliant because he looks at my books and tells me what doesn't work. He is not someone who says, I love your work, Padma, you're brilliant, this is fantastic, this is phenomenal, this is going to be the next, I don't know what, New York Times bestseller all the way. No. That's the kind of thing you might want your friends and family to say to you, but that's not what you want from somebody in the industry like that. So I think that's very important, that when young authors want to be published, it's so wonderful to hear this kind of thing. And if someone is flattering you, you might not see it as flattery. And it's so easy to fall into that trap, but don't. Because there are several people out there, unfortunately, who are ready to scam, ready to take money and pretend they're doing something and end up doing nothing.
Right. It's such a good point. And an agent who is basically working on straight commission, then they have your best interest in mind, because it also serves them.
Yes.
Okay, so how
agents should only work on commission.
Okay, So is your agent someone whose name you would put out there and recommend people contact? How would they go about being approved by an agent, a reputable agent?
So my agent is Rob Weisbach, which is Rob Weisbach Creative Management. And if you would go to his website, there will be a contact link, and any reputable agent should have that. So you'd have, I mean, I certainly, once you become an agent's client, you have other ways of contacting them. But the first time you would contact somebody like that would be sort of over the transom, which is that you would go to their website, you would study who they represent, you would look at what their interests are. Maybe they sometimes would say what they're looking for right now, perhaps, or whatever. And then you would apply to them, you would send a query letter to them via their website. And you should never send an attachment until they ask for it, because if they get an attachment from someone, it will almost with a guarantee go into the trash, because they don't know what it is. It might have a virus, it might be something different. So you would write to them essentially asking, say perhaps that you're looking for representation, tell them why you are interested in them, tell them what your book is about briefly, never boast. But if you have credentials, in my case, I had published in whatever, then those are a viable credentials. So you mention those, and then you're polite and you sum up and you see if they will reach out and contact you.
So it gets back to like applying to residency programs. Do your research and see what else the agent has done and who else they've represented and what they're looking for, and then submit. And
submit a query, tell them what your work is about, tell them why you're interested in them, and then wait to see if they reply.
And don't hide under a rock from the world if you get a rejection, because somebody will say yes.
And
eventually.
Don't give up, right? Yeah. And don't give up.
Yeah.
So do you have, this is second to last question, whether you have any aspirations and dreams that you'd care to share and anchor by stating them out loud here?
Absolutely. I hope my books will cause social change. I think over and above everything else, I would love for my books to literally to make the world a better place in whatever small way, by creating more compassion, by getting people to understand both the cruelties that we sort of mete out to one another, as well as the kindnesses, and really change. There's so much in this world that I've experienced that so many other people experience. I mean, I was in Virginia for a very long time where there was a lot of racism, and there still is overt and insidious racism in this country, in all over the world. There are issues of caste in India that are so unresolved. There are gender biases still rampant in our world after thousands of years of existence as human beings. And however much I can do to make just add a little more compassion to this world.
Definitely.
Beautiful.
Very lofty and worthy aspirations. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Do you have any final thoughts to share with the audience of creators before we say goodbye?
I will. And I think we're talking about advice for writers. The one thing that I would like to say is this: there's the need, sometimes there's this desire to be recognized by the world. And I do think that you can't let that drive you, because that's the sort of thing that might get you a bad agent. You know what I mean? So on the one hand, you have to be a bit like Veda in A Time to Dance. You have to give everything you can to your art, but after that, you have to let go. It is a bit like the ships that sail that you don't have control over. So it's a little paper boat. You do the best you can, and then you you let it go, and then you can't control it anymore. And never allow that material success or lack thereof to dictate who you are or to affect you too much.
Yes.
Right? So yes, we all are happy sometimes. Yes, we all are sad sometimes, but try not to be too battered by those storms.
That's really excellent advice. Very worthwhile. all of us considering, because we all have storms, no matter what it is. And, we can't let that stop us from pursuing the work that matters to us.
Even oceans have storms.
Even oceans, especially.
And it's an ocean.
Yeah, especially. So to end with your quote also, again, stories are the ships in which we sail the oceans of imagination, by Padma Venkatraman. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll link to your books and your website as well.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to talk to both of you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us for the I Create Daily podcast. Please let us know what creatives you would like us to interview and what topics you would be interested in hearing more about.
And if you enjoyed this show, please leave a review on iTunes. We value your feedback. We read all the reviews, and it just helps us get the word out on the I Create Daily podcast. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.